Last Saturday, during our week, we had given activity. I don't know how many of you practiced it. So, but I'll share my experience of the practice. The activity was to find in habit on exercise so that we can remember the God's presence all throughout the day. So what I did was I took up a chant and I just tried to play it a few times on my phone just to get the hang of it and the same rhythm. And then I used to just chant it along. And this particular week, I'm also traveling. So it was much more a dynamic practice because because now also I could share, maybe relate more otherwise because I stay in the monastery and most time we have monks around us and the environment of Guru Bhais. But when we are traveling, I took when taking the flight or bus or metro ride, these chant when I used to just remember this chant. And each time the chant used to play, I used to somehow get back into center or feel that joy. And somehow we all know how important it is to always keep coming back and to keep feeling his joy. And as I tried to do that, this practice was very helpful to me. I hope you also will continue to practice few of these whatever way. I think Devarshi also would share more of exercises in the coming portion. And today, in my small part of my speaking, I would like to share the story of Saint Francis. I don't know how many of you have heard the story. It's called He Explains Perfect Joy to His Brother Leo. So in this incident, I don't know if you already know, they're traveling from Paraguay to Porzincula. And so during this travel, so I think this conversation strikes up about what is perfect joy. And then, for example, I'll read out. So then Saint Francis said to Brother Leo, he said that if God bestowed on all of our brothers, the friar minors is what they call themselves, all of our brothers of the church, the monastery, to always be in his presence and be like esteemed or get all the wealth, he said that is still not perfect joy. And then during this walk of theirs, he started continuing to speak in this way. He said, if our brothers could heal the wounded, and if they can make the crooked people straighten, or even if they can raise the dead after 3 days, he said that still is not perfect joy. And he continues like that. If our brothers can read the language of the stars, can explain all the signs in the creation, but still that's not perfect joy. And like this, he continued, and it went on to the more extremes, like whatever we think are the most blessed things when we achieve God. And he started telling about whatever, like for example, in Hindu scriptures, like all the siddhis, or if you have all the wealth, or if you can walk on water, or if you can play with fire, he said, still it's not perfect joy. And now Brother Leo, who was this thing, he started listening to it. And after some time, very humbly, he said, okay, Saint Francis, please tell me what really is perfect joy. And now I'm going to paraphrase it, but in this story, what happens is then Saint Francis, he explains this. They are going on their way and it takes some time. It was a cold wintry day and they did not have too much of covering due to the poverty. And he said, so when we go reach Portrincula and when we knock on the door, and if the potter comes out and he doesn't recognize us because of all the dust on our face and because of all the trembling and because of the way we are, and he drives us away without knowing that whom we are, and then still after falling down, if he can still know and feel the presence of God and just appreciate the love and kindness of God and just know that God is the one treating them this way, this is perfect joy. And after a few seconds, he continues that after falling like that, and again, when we knock the door again, and the potter comes back this time, and he again scolds us with all the words, and he says that we are robbing, we are thieves who have come to take shelter. And even then, if we can remember the presence of God, I'll just know that God is the one who is making him do this. Then please know that this is perfect joy. And he did not stop there. I think he says, again, if you knock on the door, and this time he comes with a stick, beats them, throws them away, and they curl in the cold wintry snow. And then if you can still know that it's God who is doing through this, and you still have that joy and love and that grace of God to recognize this, then Brother Leo, that is perfect joy. So this, I think, is like giving us this hint of what this perfect joy is, and how these are like our role models. They are not only practicing presence of God, they are in God, and they're just giving us this examples of how to do this. Very good. So there was this one more incident or one more story I would like to narrate to you. This is about Corrie ten Boom. I think she's a Dutch watchmaker, and she and her sister Betsy were saving all these Jews from during the Nazi time, because Nazis were the Nazi soldiers used to kill them. So they were hiding them in their houses. And at one point, the Nazi soldiers get to know about this incident, and then they put Corrie and Betsy in this concentration camp. So even these are like big role models of this presence of God and this joy. So what happens is they have some sort of barracks, is what they call them, where it's like not a very good place at all. The straw also is put on the ground. It also starts smelling. It's very bad. And then there's only little space for them to sit in that shelter. And even if they try to sit straight, their head hits the roof. And so it was very this time. And somehow Betsy and Corrie, one of them had sneaked in a Bible, a small Bible, somehow without the guards noticing it. So there, I think Betsy started this conversation that we need to be thankful for God. And Corrie was like, what to be thankful for in this place? But then when they opened the Bible, it said, thank God for everything you have, for the everything. And then they started doing this exercise. Okay, what can we be thankful for? Then I think Betsy started by telling Corrie, I have your company. And Corrie nodded, yeah, that is good to have. And she said, we have so many people and we are reading Bible and so many people can hear us. Then she nodded. And after some time, Corrie started seeing a flea started biting her, I think. Then she said, what is this flea doing? And she did this. And Betsy said, please remember what the Bible says. We have to be thankful for everything. And she said, okay, we'll be thankful for the fleas also. And Corrie was like, she never understood it. She was accepting everything else. That one, she could not get it. But she said, okay. And then as their time in the concentration camp increases, what happens is Betsy falls ill. So her duty now is knitting. She had to stay in that same shelter. And even that smell and the small place barrack, she had to knit this thing. And but Corrie used to go to the work. And one day, Corrie came back from work, and Betsy used to knit this thing by half of the day, like in the sense, even by noon, she used to finish. She was a very quick person in the knitting. And the remaining time, she used to take this Bible around, read out about Christ, read out about God's joy to all those people in the concentration camp. They were saints now. And so what happens one day, Corrie comes back and Betsy is all twinkling. Her eyes are twinkling with light and she's very happy. And Corrie doesn't understand what's happening. And she says, Betsy, what's the matter? And Betsy says, what's really helping us? You know what happened today? And she started explaining that some few concentration officers or someone, she was trying to visit them. And well, she got to know that concentration officers had to come to check on some knitting. I don't remember clearly, but they were resisting to enter this barrack only because of the fleas there. So because of the fleas, they were resisting to come in. And then Betsy said, if the fleas weren't there, I would not have been able to read this Bible to all these people in the camp. And then now you tell me, Corrie, how the fleas, let's thank God for the fleas. And Corrie also agrees. And their examples is something. And I think maybe Betsy left her body after that, but Corrie went on to write and share about this. And many have heard that Swamiji also met her in one of this thing. So this is like such a good example, like how they are like keeping the standards high here of how to practice the presence of God or how to live in the joy of God. So at this point, thank you all for joining again. And now I would like request Devashiji to share.
Thank you, Premdas. And this is a great topic because it's central to us keeping the presence of God. That's really why we meditate. We're trying to achieve divine union, and divine union comes when we are in the presence of God and really in God, and God is in us. And you will find that when we meditate, if we've been straying all over with our mind and our desires and feelings all day long, it's much more difficult to bring our mind back to be able to meditate. And if we've been practicing some God remembrance all day long, then when we sit down to meditate, we're already starting at a good place. And then we just go much, much deeper. It's much easier. And so this really is very important. It's not like we have the meditation time and then we sort of waste the rest of the day. It's really all of this works really closely together for Kriya Yogis. Now, the presence of God means really having the presence of God in our heart, because God is not just a thought. As Swamiji said, God is feeling. And he said that feeling is Satchidanandam, divine bliss. It's also divine love. And so it's really having love for God in the heart. The thoughts are also important. That can be sort of what triggers the process and starts it, doing some japa, chanting to God, talking to God. Even if it's automatic at times, still it just keeps it going, keeps that mental thought going. But try more and more to feel that we are in God's presence. This is practicing the presence of God. And so this means feeling that God is in us, we are in God or the Guru, whichever way you prefer to do it. I find it helpful when I'm walking in a street and I'm seeing a lot of people. I find it helpful to feel that this is Divine Mother everywhere. This is the chant, Ram Prasad's chant, Divine Mother everywhere stays. And she is not limited to one form. She's in all forms, in all of creation. And I found that when I look for God everywhere I go, I don't always see God, but if I try to look, and I keep trying to look, I start having glimpses. It's almost like the veil of delusion that Divine Mother put over this amazing creation, that it takes some effort on our part of persistence, trying to see behind that veil, both in meditation and activity, but that when we try persistently, even when we don't get results initially, if we're persistent, then every once in a while that veil almost disappears and falls away, and we have a glimpse of the divine in a very sweet way or a very inspiring way. This ability to do this regularly comes through changing our habitual way of acting and especially of thinking. I think maybe they touched on this last week, but really habit, we think of habit as habitual actions, but really the most pernicious habits that really bring us up or down is habitually where our heart's feelings and our thoughts are going during the day. And so you'll find it helpful, as I have, to try to make a habit of tuning into God's presence, of practicing devotion, practicing the presence of God, and try to use certain triggers during the day just to bring us back to that. Because there are certain points during the day that are kind of just sort of transitions from one place to another, from one thing to another. And so take a few of these things and use them as triggers to really trigger your God presence practice. And I'll give a few examples. When you go out your house at the beginning of the day to go to work, try when you open the door just to make it a habit. From now on, every time I open the door and go out the door, I'm going to chant to the Guru, or I'll talk to Divine Mother, and I'll keep that going as long as I can. And if you have, when you walk through the door of your workplace or your office, do the same thing. As you walk through the door, I'm making a habit from now on. Every time I walk through that door, I'm going to start thinking of God. And if you use willpower and determination to do that, you will find that every time you walk through that door, it starts to become almost automatic, because it's hard to explain that time and that place are imbued for you with the presence of God. I had a very strange experience. It wasn't with God, it was with a song. And it was just, I was in a small shopping mall place in Gurgaon. And I was walking there, and suddenly this song from, I think it was the 1960s, came to my mind. That I wasn't happy that it came, but it was there. And, I listened to it in my mind for a bit, because it's something I used to listen to. And then it went away. And then about 2 years later, I was in that mall again. I was walking in the same place, and all of a sudden that song came back again. And it was almost like I imbued that place with the vibration of that song, and it was there. And it's the same thing that we do with certain times of the day, certain places that we walk through, to really start persistently putting the presence of God in that moment. And there are many times during the day that we do this, so you can be creative with it. The most important one was when we're falling asleep and waking up. And this is a practice that I've done for many years. But very consciously, for me, it's mentally chanting Om Guru, Om Guru. And I'll talk about that. That's a practice that Swami Kriyanandaji gave to really practice the presence of God and the Guru. And so what I'll do is I'll mentally chant Om Guru as I'm falling asleep. And I'll even try, and again, play with this, experiment with it. I'll try to mentally chant it even in my sleep. And it's a fun practice to do. And then what I will also have done and do is when I wake up in the middle of the night, I play a game, which is to see how quickly I can get back into the practice. And sometimes it's like I wake up in the morning and I get up, I move around, I start brushing my teeth, and finally my mind wakes up enough that I remember. But sometimes I have found that as soon as my mind comes into consciousness, just the habit is there to start mentally chanting Om Guru to the Guru. And in the middle of the night, every time you wake up, and just work on this, and you'll find how amazingly deep it goes. And because after doing this for a few years, I also experimented with doing it with my breath during my sleep. Because one time I was dreaming, and in my dream, I thought, well, how can I keep chanting Om Guru in my sleep? It's so hard. And just this thought, I think it came from God in some way. This thought just came, do it with your breath. Inhale and exhale. And I'm not teaching this as a practice, because Yogananda didn't teach that. But during the sleep, try to find a way, if that's it, to really keep mentally chanting Om Guru, Om Guru. And you'll find that it really starts to get very, very deep-seated. And there have been times when even in the midst of my sleep, I have found myself chanting that, or in the middle of a dream. When I was visiting Swami Kriyananda one time in Gurgaon many years ago, I asked him about this idea of feeling divine joy and feeling the presence of the Guru, because I had been with him for a few weeks, watching him, being with him, sitting at his feet as he recorded a lot of these TV shows that he had done. And I asked him, I was just about to leave go back to America, and I asked him, how do I keep this joy that I feel in your presence all the time, this awareness of the Guru? It's so easy when I'm sitting at your feet to feel this, and I'm going back to America, and how do I keep that going so strongly? And I'm embarrassed to say I was going back to Ananda Village, where there's all these saints and Guru Bhais, but it's not an easy practice to do, even when we're with good company. And so I asked him that, and this was his response, and he gave this response a lot of energy. He said, I have found that mentally chanting Om Guru is a wonderful practice. If you keep consciously chanting that day and night, it's amazing how you can change. You feel more and more desire for God, more and more purity of heart, more and more dedication. That's what really matters. So if you want more and more desire for God, more and more purity of heart, more and more dedication, chant Om Guru. This is what Swamiji was saying, and he had experienced it. I've experienced it too, that tuning into the vibration and the grace of the Guru changes our consciousness, because it puts us in tune with the Guru's consciousness, and that the power of that magnetism a strong magnet always influences a weaker magnet. And this really, more than anything, this is how the Guru changes us. It's on that level of magnetism. I share this story a lot because it really shows that principle, how it works. One time I had a cup on my desk in my office that held paper clips. And it was a tiny little cup with a little hole at the top. But because the clips would go into the bottom, the inventor designed a circular magnet at the top so that the paper clips would be stuck there and they'd be easy to pick off. But one time I picked off one of those paper clips, and 2 or 3 more paper clips came stuck to the first one by magnetism. And these clips had become magnetic just by being in the proximity of that little round magnet of that cup. And so this really is how we change our own consciousness, our energy, our own magnetism, by just being in close proximity to the Guru's magnetism and the Guru's power. And this is why this practice is so powerful, chanting Om Guru, because it puts us right into that magnet in a dynamic and positive way. And we have to be receptive, because the magnetism of a Guru, it's not given if we're passive. Yogananda once said there are a lot of rats and mice living on Mount Washington, and they're not finding God. So just being passive about it doesn't work. We have to be receptive, and very dynamically receptive by doing our part, by tuning into the Guru, by calling to the Guru or God throughout the day as we can. And again, I would recommend this practice of Om Guru, especially because it's the one that Yogananda gave to a few disciples. It's really the only mantra that he has given to people, and Swami Kriyananda too, to practice as a japa mantra. And so I would highly recommend it for disciples of Yogananda to really seriously consider using this as your japa mantra, because he never initiated people into a japa mantra. Yogananda didn't. We have the Hong Sao technique and the Om technique, but in a way this is the universal japa mantra that he gave for people. Now, one thing that happens when we do this is that we sometimes wonder, how would I respond to a real crisis, like an emergency? And I think maybe we've all faced some emergencies in our lives, and maybe we found that we didn't respond in the highest way. But even at the moment of death, how will we respond? Where will our consciousness be? Because in the Gita, the Lord says that where your mind and heart and consciousness are at death, that's where you will go. And if your heart and mind are with God, you will go to God. If they're with the Guru and God, you'll go to God and Guru. And a friend of mine had heard the story about when Gandhiji was assassinated. The story goes apparently that he was chanting Sri Ram, Sri Ram, as he was falling over dead. And my friend said, gosh, this was very early on in my friend's spiritual career, so he was still very young about these things. And he said, gosh, I hope when I die, I have the presence of mind to remember to say Sri Ram, or Om Guru, or chant to God. I hope I remember to do that. And I had to laugh at my friend and say, it's not about remembering to doing that. If your heart is with God, and if you have a life dedicated to loving God, to practicing the presence of God, to chanting this mantra, any mantra or japa or any way of tuning into God, then at that moment, Gandhiji wasn't like he got shot and he thought, okay, oh my God, I'm about to die. What do I do now? Oh yeah, I chant to God. That's what I do. He wasn't thinking like that. He was already chanting to God, because that was his practice, is just to chant to God and to chant to the Lord all the time, or as often as he could. And so if we can do that, trust that it won't be a matter of trying to remember at that moment. Just trust that if we do our best effort to tune into God in this life, to give our thoughts to God, trust that at that moment, when we leave the body, it will come easily and automatically. And we will go perhaps even to final divine freedom through the effort that we've put out towards practicing and being in the presence of God and the Guru throughout our whole life. So I'll just share one more story that kind of concurs with the stories that Prem Das shared. It's about an Indian saint, Swami Ram Das. He was a South Indian saint. And his practice was always to chant to the Lord as Ram and to practice the presence of God and to see God in everything. And it's easy to see God in good things. And Swami Kriyananda would often, say that it sort of annoyed him when disciples of Yogananda would just talk about all the good things that Yogananda gave them. Oh, Master gave me a new apartment. He gave me a new car. And Swamiji would get a little irritated because he said, the Guru is not trying to make our lives easier. He's trying to help us to find God. And he gives us tests too, to challenge us, to help us grow. He's like our best friend, actually, in that way. And so Swami Ramdas would always see Ram in everything. And when he would write his biography or his travel notes, he would say, this child of Ram was at the train station, and the station master, who didn't like sadhus, started beating Ram with a stick. And so the Lord Ram himself was blessing me with his stick. And then one day someone came in and stole in his cave all his belongings, his spectacles and his begging bowl. And he wrote, and today the Lord came and took back his spectacles and his begging bowl and blessed me with his presence. And so I shared this at a satsang at another village once, that story. And I said, people talk about, and one of the examples that Swamiji got irritated about is people say, oh, I was driving and I was lost and I was late for an appointment and Master gave me a parking place. He opened up a parking place for me. And people, I've heard people say that. And it's sweet. I'm not being judgmental about it. But at a satsang, I said, how many of you say the same thing when you come back and find that you got a parking ticket? How many people say that Master gave me a parking ticket? Oh, I'm so happy. And I shared this story. But it was very funny. It was sweet because that week I got a voicemail message from a friend at Ananda Palo Alto who had heard the satsang. He said, Devarshi, something amazing happened today. I came back to my car. Master gave me a parking ticket. He gave me a parking ticket. He was so excited. To have that spiritual victory is really what he was excited about because he was able to put it into practice. And these things are real practices that really can start to change our life. That really, when you do it as a practice, you do start to see God. You start to see the Guru in all things that come to us, both good or bad. And that is the perfect joy that Prem Das was talking about. Perfect joy is unconditional joy. It's not conditioned by whether something happens to us is, quote, good or bad, or whether we like it or not. We feel God's presence at all times. And that's the perfect joy we're trying to achieve. And it comes much easier when we see the hand of God in all moments, when we practice the presence of God at all times, in good times and in bad times. So this is why this is such a very important practice. So again, thank you all for joining us.